Another day, another project. Just got back home, drove about 8 hours today to pick up this beast right here behind me. So I'm gonna get this thing unloaded and show you what this rare bike is all about. So here it is. This is the bike I just picked up. This is a VOR or VOR 400 MX model. Now, I don't know a ton about these things, so I'm definitely going to have to do some research, but this is a handmade Italian bike. These things were originally under the name Vertimetti, I believe is how you would say it. And they made a 495 four-stroke MX model. It ended up going to VOR, or VOR, and then they made a 400, a 495, a 450, and the popular 503. So this one's a 400 model. It's a little bit different. Much more rare from what I have seen. It's got a lot of neat features. So let me show you guys what makes this bike super unique. Gear drive timing. So the timing system in here is all gears, similar to what you would find on like a diesel engine. Pretty robust system. There's no cam chain to brake. There's no timing belt like you would have on a car. One of the other really neat things here is they integrated the frame as the air box. So as you can see behind the shock, there's nothing back there. The air boot goes up and it uses the frame and it uses the air filter up here. The swing arm is a really nice piece. The seller told me that this was his father's bike and they were pretty creative. So he said that his father put these grease zerks in because there's not bearings in here, but rather a bushing. And those bushings would wear out pretty quickly. So that was a little modification that he claimed that his father did to increase the life of these bushings. And there's a grease zerk on either side, as well as a grease zerk down here on the linkage. Up from the linkage, you'll see an Öhlins rear shock, which is a really nice piece. You can see the shock mount is pretty much almost straight up and down, which is really unique. Commonly, they'd be set a little farther forward, but as you can see, that's where the air box is on this system. And as you'll see, there's bolts everywhere. This frame is bolted together. This is not a welded frame. Yes, obviously there's tabs welded, but this frame comes in multiple pieces and it gets bolted together. From the factory, hydraulic clutch. This one has a Magura setup. Very neat feature here, forward Kickstarter with an auto decomp. It's actually got, you can see right there, that's the auto decomp system working. We got our chain on the right side, brake on the left side. So I guess really the only question now is, can we get this thing to run? Because it does not run at this time. First things first, before we get cracked into this thing, time to power wash. So I got the bike all cleaned up. Came out pretty good. I was able to use a little bit of aluminum brightener on some of these aluminum pieces. As you can see, the muffler cleaned up really well. The hubs got a little shine to them. Again, I used the Aluma-Bright. This thing's pretty darn clean now. I came up with this guy here for the air box. So I got the VOR 400 all cleaned up, got it pulled back into the shop. It's all dried off now. I'm gonna get the gas tank off, we'll get better access at this, and then I gotta get that carburetor apart. I ordered a rebuild kit for this carburetor. Hopefully it's the right one. This is kind of an oddball, Dall'Orto, I believe is how you say it, carburetor. Sometimes when I got grease like that, you can see there, I just take some regular WD-40. I coat all the grease with the WD-40 and then I let it sit for a while, and then when you come back to it, sometimes that grease will just come right off. And it seems to do a pretty good job. You can see all that grease on the engine just comes right off, and I've only sprayed this with WD-40. And that's only been sitting for 5 minutes on there. Since I made such a mess with all that WD-40 on this thing, I decided I'm just gonna wash it again, get it extra clean, then we'll get this thing torn apart. On these side panel number plates, on the inside of these things, at one point somebody had spray painted them yellow, and it really doesn't look that good. So I took a little bit of this spray on paint stripper and I got it sitting on here, so hopefully it'll dissolve all that spray paint and I can just scrape it all off and return these things back to good condition. So I think I've seen better throttles than this. Think we're gonna need to replace this thing here. The clutch was not working at all. I popped the cover off here and yeah, I think you guys can see why that's not working. I found actually on a lot of these older bikes that I deal with, when they sit for a long time, the brake fluid basically disintegrates, and this is kind of what you're left with. Sometimes this plugs lines, sometimes you're able to just flush it out and reuse it. I'm hoping that's the case here, obviously, so we're gonna get this thing cleaned out. Working man ultrasonic cleaner. Take an oscillating tool, I just set the metal part on this metal canister, turn this thing on, and you guys can see it actually works. Just got all the mineral spirits / parts cleaner drained out of here. That actually works with the oscillating tool. Using that as a ultrasonic cleaner, you can see some of that gunk down there. So there you guys go. That's a little tip. Using an oscillating tool as a basically a vibrator for a metal cup acts as an ultrasonic cleaner. So I just got a couple new parts in here for the VOR 400. Truth be told, parts are very hard to find for this bike. I was able to source a front number plate from UFO, This one already had the KX style front fender, so I went with the KX style front plate. I got some of these new lock-on grips from UFO, very similar to the ODI ones. These are made in Italy, so we're gonna try these out and see how we like them. I was able to track this down off eBay. This is an air intake boot off a Husaberg FE450 bike. It uses a very similar design with the frame as the intake, and this was off somewhere around 2008 model. As you can see, this is the original VOR intake, and they're very similar. You can see why we had to replace this VOR one. It's well worn out, and it was leaking air pretty severely. And then for the intake boot, this factory one, as you can see, it's pretty dry rotted, and I was trying to find somewhat of a compatible replacement without just using a silicone hose. I was able to find this, which is like a Yamaha four-wheeler YFZ 450. I'm not sure how well it's going to work, but as far as inlet and outlet sizes, it was pretty close to a direct match. All right, I guess we got nothing left to do but see if we can get this thing to make some noise. Sign of life. Well, last but not least, we got to do something about the seat cover. This thing is really in pretty poor condition. It's got tears in it, and you really cannot find these being made anymore. So without spending tons of money to try and find a new old stock one, I just did what I normally do, and I got a hold of Guts. Now, being that nobody really makes seat covers for these VORs, I ended up just ordering one for a bike with one of the biggest seats I know, and that's a mid-90s KTM. So this is actually for like a KTM 360 MX. I'm hoping this thing will work. I gave it a little test fit, and it definitely fits. There's quite a bit extra. So I'm hoping I can get it all tucked in and fitted nicely. But first, we got to get this old one off. have this VOR, really unique bike. I got it cleaned up really well. I touched up on a few things. I got it running. It's really not running the way it should be still. I'm kind of leaning towards maybe a valve adjustment, or it might need some valve work, head work. I got to go through the carb a little bit better too and see if I can tune it or if something is amiss there, but I'll do that in another video. I just wanted to get this thing all up and going, at least make it look pretty while it's sitting in the shop waiting to get worked on again. But this is a really cool bike, and I'm super glad that this thing runs. Very unique. Once I get this thing running right, we're gonna have to get it out on the track and see how it rides. I mean, maybe even compare it to something similar of the era, like the YZ 426. But thank you guys so much for watching, and if you like this, subscribe, stay tuned. I got plenty more builds coming up, bikes, anything moto related.